The Millionaire's twins didn't sleep a minute until the nanny did the unimaginable. Those were the words that changed everything in the Blackwood mansion, where two innocent children had become prisoners of their own exhaustion. And their desperate father was about to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Hi, I'm John Parker, and today's story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much to me, and leave in the comments which city or country you are listening from. In the heart of Charleston, South Carolina, where Spanish moss drapes ancient oak trees like forgotten memories, stood the imposing Blackwood estate. Behind its wrought iron gates and pristine gardens lived a tragedy that money couldn't solve. Alexander Blackwood, heir to a shipping fortune worth $300 million, sat in his mahogany-paneled study at 3 a.m, his hands trembling as he held yet another resignation letter. The 27th nanny in 18 months had just quit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," the letter read, "but I cannot continue caring for children who scream through the night and refuse every comfort. This is beyond my expertise." Alexander crumpled the paper, his jaw clenched with a mixture of rage and despair. His 5-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, hadn't slept through a single night since their mother's death 2 years ago. Dark circles shadowed his once bright eyes, and his southern charm had withered into cold desperation. The grandfather clock chimed, its deep resonance echoing through halls that had once filled with laughter. Now, only silence lived there, broken, occasionally by the twins' anguished cries that seemed to pierce through the very walls. Alexander's mother-in-law, Margaret Sinclair, had been relentless in her criticism. "Those children need discipline, not coddling," she'd say with her refined Atlanta accent, her pearl necklace catching the light as she shook her head disapprovingly. "Victoria would be ashamed of how you're handling this." But Alexander knew better. This wasn't about discipline. Ever since Victoria's tragic car accident on that rainy October evening, the twins had retreated into a world of nightmares and sleepless terror. Child psychologists, sleep specialists, even a renowned pediatrician from Vanderbilt University, none had provided answers. The children would lie in their beds, wide-eyed and trembling, whispering about the dark lady who visited them in their dreams as dawn approached. Alexander made his way upstairs to check on Emma and Ethan. Their nursery, once painted in cheerful yellows and blues, now felt like a battlefield. Toys lay scattered across the floor, evidence of another restless night. The twins sat huddled, together on Emma's bed, their identical green eyes, so much like their mother's, staring at him with a mixture of love and inexplicable fear. "Daddy," Emma whispered, her small voice hoarse from crying. "She came again, the dark lady. She says Mommy isn't coming back." Ethan nodded solemnly beside her, his tiny hand clutching a worn teddy bear that had belonged to Victoria. Alexander's heart shattered a little more with each word. He'd tried everything: nightlights, meditation music, staying in their room until they fell asleep. But nothing worked. The moment he left, the nightmares would return, and his children would slip further away from him. The truth was, Alexander was drowning. His shipping company, Blackwood Maritime, demanded his attention during the day, while his children's suffering consumed his nights. His business partner, Richard Hawthorne, had been pressuring him to consider boarding school options. "Alex, you can't keep living like this," Richard had said over bourbon at the Charleston Country Club. "Those kids need professional help, and you need to save your sanity." But Alexander refused to abandon his children the way he felt he'd abandoned Victoria that tragic night. Standing in the nursery doorway, watching his twins finally succumb to exhaustion as morning light filtered through the plantation shutters, Alexander made a silent vow. He would find someone who could help them, someone who understood that behind their sleepless nights lay hearts desperate for healing. He didn't know then that his prayers were about to be answered in the most extraordinary way, by a woman whose arrival would reveal secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his late wife, and the mysterious force that seemed determined to keep his children trapped in perpetual fear. What Alexander didn't realize that morning was that his desperation had already set wheels in motion that would lead him to the most unconventional nanny he'd ever encounter. Later that day, as he sat in his corner office at Blackwood Maritime, overlooking the historic Charleston harbor, his executive assistant Diane rushed in with unusual excitement. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a woman here about the nanny position. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's different. She says she heard about the twins through mutual connections." Alexander looked up from shipping manifests, his exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Diane, I'm not interviewing anyone else today. The last thing I need is another nanny who'll quit after a week." But something in Diane's expression made him pause. In her 20 years of working for the Blackwood family, Diane had never looked quite so intrigued. "Sir, she's not like the others. She asked specifically about Emma and Ethan's nightmares. She knew about them before I even mentioned the sleeping problems." Curiosity overrode Alexander's weariness. 5 minutes later, Serafina May Whitmore walked into his office, and Alexander felt the air itself shift. She was perhaps 35, with striking, silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and eyes the color of stormy seas. Her dress was simple but impeccable, navy blue with small pearl buttons, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. But it was something else entirely that caught Alexander's attention. She radiated a sense of peace he hadn't felt since Victoria's death. "Mr. Blackwood," Serafina said, extending a graceful hand, "I'm Serafina Whitmore. I understand your children are struggling with more than just sleep." Her voice carried a gentle southern lilt, but underneath lay something deeper. Wisdom, perhaps, or the kind of strength that comes from understanding profound loss. Alexander found himself studying her face, searching for the usual signs of judgment or pity he'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, he found only genuine compassion. "Ms. Whitmore," he replied carefully, "I appreciate your interest, but I should be honest. We've had 27 nannies in 18 months. My children are challenging. They haven't slept through the night in 2 years, and they have very specific fears that most people don't understand." Serafina nodded thoughtfully, settling into the leather chair across from his desk with unusual grace. "Mr. Blackwood, sometimes children see things adults have forgotten how to see. Sometimes their fears aren't just fears, they're messages." Something about her words sent a chill down Alexander's spine. What kind of messages? Serafina's storm-colored eyes seemed to look right through him. The kind that come from unfinished business, from love that transcends death, and from secrets that demand to be revealed. She paused, studying his reaction. "Your wife Victoria didn't die in that car accident by chance, did she? There was something she was trying to tell you that night, something important enough that she's still trying to communicate." Alexander's blood ran cold. No one, absolutely no one, knew the details of that terrible night. Victoria had called him frantically at 9:47 p.m., her voice shaking with fear and urgency. "Alex, I found something. About Margaret, about the family trust. I have proof, but I can't talk over the phone. Meet me at Magnolia Cemetery in an hour. Don't tell anyone where you're going." He'd been stuck in a board meeting with investors from Savannah, unable to leave immediately. By the time he'd arrived at the cemetery, police cars and ambulances surrounded Victoria's overturned Mercedes. "How could you possibly know that?" Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. Serafina's expression softened with infinite gentleness. "Because Emma and Ethan know, Mr. Blackwood. Children are closer to the spiritual realm than adults. They're not having nightmares. They're receiving visits from their mother, who's trying to protect them from a danger that still exists in this house. The room seemed to spin around Alexander. Margaret had been the first to arrive at the cemetery. That night, tears streaming down her face as she held him while he identified Victoria's body. She'd insisted on staying at the mansion for weeks afterward, helping with the children, managing funeral arrangements, taking care of every detail while he drowned in grief. She'd become their pillar of strength, their guardian angel. But now, sitting across from this mysterious woman who seemed to see straight into his soul, Alexander remembered things he'd tried to forget. Victoria's growing suspicions about missing funds from the children's trust, her late-night phone calls to lawyers, her increasing tension whenever Margaret visited, and that last, desperate call that had cost her life. "What are you saying?" he asked, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Serafina leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying both gentleness and steel. "I'm saying that your mother-in-law has been stealing from your children's inheritance for years, and Victoria discovered it. I'm saying that car accident wasn't an accident. And I'm saying that until the truth comes to light and justice is served, your children will never know peace, because their mother's spirit cannot rest." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside his office windows, Charleston Harbor bustled with afternoon commerce, but inside, time seemed suspended. Everything Alexander thought he knew about his family, about Victoria's death, about his children's suffering, crumbled around him like ancient walls, finally giving way to truth. And in that moment of devastating revelation, he realized that Serafina Whitmore wasn't just a nanny. She was the key to unlocking a mystery that had been destroying his family from within. That evening, Serafina arrived at the Blackwood mansion carrying only a small leather satchel and an aura of quiet determination that seemed to calm even the ancient oaks lining the driveway. Margaret Sinclair was waiting in the grand foyer, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the marble table where fresh magnolias sat in crystal vases. Her smile was as sharp as her Atlanta drawl when she greeted the new nanny. "Well, well," Margaret said, her eyes scanning Serafina from head to toe with practiced disapproval. "Another lamb to the slaughter, I suppose. You do realize, dear, that those children are completely unmanageable. The last nanny actually had a nervous breakdown." But Serafina simply smiled, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sinclair, isn't it? I can see where Victoria got her strength. The children have told me so much about their grandmother." Margaret's composure flickered for just a moment, so briefly that anyone else might have missed it. But Serafina caught the flash of panic in those cold blue eyes, the barely perceptible tightening around her mouth. "The children told you about me, but they barely speak to anyone anymore." Serafina's smile deepened, carrying secrets Margaret couldn't fathom. "Children see more than we think, Mrs. Sinclair. Sometimes they see things that happened before they were born, things their spirits remember." As if summoned by some invisible force, Emma and Ethan appeared at the top of the grand staircase, their small hands gripping the mahogany banister. For the first time in 2 years, they weren't cowering or crying. Instead, they stared down at Serafina with wide, wondering eyes, as if recognizing something familiar in her presence. "Mommy's friend," Emma whispered, her voice carrying a note of awe that made Margaret step backward. "That's impossible," Margaret muttered, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Serafina began climbing the stairs, each step measured and graceful, while the twins remained perfectly still, watching her approach. "Hello, Emma." "Hello, Ethan," she said softly. "Your mommy sent me to help you sleep peacefully again." Ethan, who hadn't spoken to anyone except his sister in months, stepped forward and took Serafina's hand without hesitation. "She says the bad lady can't hurt us anymore," he whispered, his green eyes, so like Victoria's, focused intently on Serafina's face. She says you know about the papers hidden in the secret place." Behind them, Margaret's pearls clicked against each other as her hands trembled. The blood drained from her face as she realized that her carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel through the voices of children she'd dismissed as traumatized and unreliable. Alexander arrived home to find his children sitting calmly in the library with Serafina actually eating dinner for the first time in weeks. Emma was giggling at something Serafina had said, while Ethan was showing her his mother's favorite book, a collection of southern ghost stories that Victoria used to read aloud on stormy nights. "Daddy!" Emma called out, running to embrace him with more energy than she'd shown in months. "Serafina knows about the secret drawer in Mommy's desk." The color drained from Alexander's face as he met Serafina's knowing gaze. Victoria's antique writing desk had been moved to the children's playroom after her death, and Alexander had searched every inch of it for clues about her final phone call. There was no secret drawer, at least none that he had ever discovered. "What secret drawer, sweetheart?" he asked carefully, kneeling down to Emma's level. "The one behind the little roses," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if everyone should know about hidden compartments in antique furniture. "Mommy showed us before the Dark Lady made her go away. She said if anything bad happened, we should remember where she hid the important papers." Serafina's eyes met Alexander's over the children's heads, and in that moment, they both understood that Victoria had been preparing for her own death. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled hysteria. "Alexander, this woman is filling the children's heads with nonsense. They're traumatized, not psychic. This is exactly the kind of delusional thinking that's been keeping them from healing." But as she spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the lights flickered ominously. Emma and Ethan moved closer to Serafina, who placed protective hands on their shoulders. "Mrs. Sinclair," Serafina said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. "Victoria knows what you did. She knows about the forged documents, the stolen trust funds, the threats you made to keep her quiet, and she knows about the mechanic you paid to tamper with her brakes." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Thick with implication and impossible to ignore, Margaret's mask finally slipped completely. Her face contorted with rage and desperation as she realized her darkest secrets were being exposed through the most unlikely of sources. "You don't know anything!" she screamed, her refined Atlanta accent dissolving into something raw and ugly. Victoria was a naive little girl who didn't understand business. "That money should have been mine. It was my daughter's husband's family fortune." But even as Margaret raged, the children remained calm in Serafina's presence, as if they were finally protected from the darkness that had haunted them for so long. And Alexander understood that this mysterious nanny had done something no amount of money could accomplish. She had given his children back their mother's love, and in doing so, she was about to give his family back their justice. The discovery of Victoria's secret drawer changed everything. That night, while Margaret retreated to the guest wing in stunned silence, Serafina guided Emma and Ethan to their mother's antique writing desk in the playroom. The children moved with purpose, as if following instructions whispered by invisible lips. Emma's small fingers traced the carved roses along the desk's edge until she found the one that moved, pressing it gently to reveal a hidden compartment no larger than a jewelry box. Inside, wrapped in Victoria's favorite lavender silk scarf, lay a manila envelope thick with documents and a small digital recorder. Alexander's hands trembled as he opened the envelope under Serafina's watchful gaze. Bank statements showed systematic withdrawals from the children's trust fund. Nearly $2 million over 4 years. Forged signatures, altered legal documents, and photographic evidence of Margaret meeting with a man Alexander didn't recognize outside a seedy auto repair shop in North Charleston. Dear God, Alexander whispered, his voice breaking as the full scope of Margaret's betrayal became clear, but it was the recorder that delivered the killing blow to his heart. Victoria's voice, shaking with fear but determined, filled the playroom as she documented her discoveries in her final days. If something happens to me, Alex needs to know the truth. Margaret has been stealing from Emma and Ethan since they were babies. She forged my signature on withdrawal authorizations and threatened to make the children disappear if I exposed her. Serafina placed a gentle hand on Alexander's shoulder as tears streamed down his face. The twins sat quietly nearby, somehow understanding the gravity of their mother's words without fully comprehending the evil that had surrounded them. Victoria's voice continued, stronger now, as if she was speaking directly from beyond the grave. I've hired a private investigator. Margaret killed my parents in that boating accident 5 years ago. It wasn't weather that capsized their yacht. She's been systematically eliminating anyone who might challenge her control over the family fortune. The recording revealed Margaret's twisted logic. She believed the Blackwood wealth rightfully belonged to her deceased daughter's memory, and by extension, to her as Victoria's mother. She saw Alexander as an interloper, and the twins as obstacles to her claim on the family legacy. When Victoria discovered the embezzlement and began asking questions, Margaret had escalated from financial crime to murder, using the same mechanic who had sabotaged the yacht to tamper with Victoria's car. As the final recording ended, Emma looked up at her father with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her 5 years. "Daddy, Mommy said the dark lady would be gone when the truth came out. She said we could sleep again when the bad grandmother couldn't hurt anyone anymore." The innocence in her voice contrasted sharply with the horror of what they'd just discovered, but somehow, in Serafina's presence, even the darkest revelations felt manageable. Alexander felt a rage building inside him that threatened to consume everything in its path. This woman, this monster, had not only murdered his beloved wife, but had been living in his house, playing loving grandmother too. The children she'd made orphans, stealing their inheritance while comforting them in their grief. The hypocrisy was so complete, so calculating, that it defied comprehension. But before Alexander could storm to the guest wing and confront Margaret with the evidence, Serafina stopped him with a gentle but firm grip on his arm. "Mr. Blackwood, justice requires patience and wisdom, not rage. Margaret is dangerous because she has nothing left to lose. We must be strategic." Her storm-colored eyes held depths of understanding that spoke of her own encounters with evil. "There's something else you need to know about your mother-in-law. This isn't her first family." The blood chilled in Alexander's veins as Serafina continued. "Margaret Sinclair has been married 4 times. 3 of her previous husbands died in suspicious accidents, leaving her with substantial inheritances. She changed her name after each marriage, but the pattern remained the same: financial manipulation followed by convenient deaths." She paused, studying Alexander's face as this new horror sank in. Victoria wasn't her only daughter. She had 2 other children who died young, officially from childhood illnesses, but the timing always coincided with insurance payouts. The realization hit Alexander like a physical blow. Margaret wasn't just a grieving grandmother driven to desperation by loss. She was a serial killer who had been using her own family members as stepping stones to wealth for decades. The woman who had held him while he wept at Victoria's funeral, who had sung lullabies to his traumatized children, who had insisted on helping with every detail of their lives, was a predator who had orchestrated every tragedy that had befallen his family. "How do you know all this?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Serafina's expression grew distant, as if she was seeing across great expanses of time and space. "Because Victoria's spirit led me to the other families, Margaret. destroyed, because the dead don't rest until justice is served, and there are many souls crying out for peace. She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes Alexander saw not just wisdom, but the weight of countless tragedies. "I've been tracking Margaret Sinclair for 3 years, Mr. Blackwood. Victoria's death was the key I needed to finally stop her." As if sensing that her secret had been discovered, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the playroom. Margaret appeared in the doorway, but she was no longer the refined southern matriarch they thought they knew. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and in her hand she held something that made Alexander's blood freeze. A small revolver, the same one Victoria had kept in her nightstand for protection, the one that had disappeared. "After her death, I should have known," Margaret said, her voice eerily calm despite her wild appearance. "Victoria always was too clever for her own good, and now it seems she's found a way to continue meddling from beyond the grave." Her eyes, once warm and grandmotherly, now held the cold calculation of a predator cornered with no escape route remaining. The gun in Margaret's hand seemed to absorb all the light in the room, casting shadows that danced like the ghosts of her victims across the playroom walls. But instead of cowering, Serafina stepped protectively in front of the children, her presence radiating an otherworldly calm that seemed to unsettle Margaret more than any show of fear would have. "Mrs. Sinclair," Serafina said quietly, "or should I say Mrs. Davidson, or perhaps Mrs. Chen? You've worn so many names, destroyed so many families." Margaret's composed facade cracked further. "How could you possibly know about—" She stopped herself, realizing that admitting knowledge of those identities would be a confession. But Serafina's knowing smile told her it was too late for denials. "The Patterson family in Savannah sends their regards, Margaret. Little Timothy's spirit has been waiting 7 years for justice, and the Williamson twins from Atlanta, they never forgot how you poisoned their birthday cake." The revelation hit Alexander like a sledgehammer. Margaret hadn't just killed adults for their money, she had murdered children who stood in her way. The woman who had sung lullabies to Emma and Ethan, who had brought them homemade cookies and bedtime stories, had killed other children with her own hands. The scope of her evil was beyond anything his mind could process. "You don't understand," Margaret said, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "Everything I did was for family, for legacy. These weak men who couldn't protect their fortunes, these spoiled children who would have squandered their inheritances, I saved that money from being wasted." She gestured wildly with the gun, and Alexander tensed, ready to throw himself between the weapon and his children. But Emma stepped out from behind Serafina, her small voice cutting through Margaret's hysteria with startling clarity. "The other children told us about you, bad grandmother. They said you made them sick with the white powder in their milk." Ethan nodded solemnly beside his sister. "Mommy showed us in our dreams. She said you put something in her coffee the morning. She found the papers to make her dizzy when she was driving." Margaret's face went ashen as the twins spoke with the matter-of-fact tone children use when recounting fairy tales. Except these were real horrors witnessed through spiritual eyes. "That's impossible," she whispered. "They were too young to remember, too traumatized to be reliable witnesses." But even as she spoke, Margaret seemed to realize that the children's otherworldly knowledge made them the most dangerous witnesses of all. Serafina's voice carried the authority of divine judgment when she spoke again. "Margaret Elizabeth Davidson. John Morrison Sinclair, you stand accused by the dead of 11 murders spanning 23 years, 4 husbands, 3 children, 2 parents-in-law, Victoria Blackwood, and her unborn child she didn't yet know she was carrying." The last revelation made Alexander gasp. Victoria had been pregnant when she died, pregnant with the sibling Emma, and Ethan would never know. The weight of that final loss, not just his wife, but their unborn child, broke something fundamental. Inside Alexander, But before his grief could transform into the kind of rage that would get them all killed, Serafina placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Justice, not vengeance," she whispered, and somehow those words contained enough strength to keep him anchored. Margaret was unraveling completely now, her carefully constructed persona dissolving like sugar in rain. "I gave them good lives," she screamed. "I made sure they were comfortable, that they wanted for nothing before they had to go. I'm not a monster. I'm a guardian of wealth, a protector of family legacies." The delusion in her voice was complete, as if she genuinely believed that murder was an act of preservation rather than destruction. But the children showed no fear of their grandmother's breakdown. Instead, they moved closer to Serafina, their eyes fixed on something behind Margaret that only they could see. "Mommy's here," Emma announced with quiet satisfaction. "She brought all the other mommies and daddies. They're not sad anymore. They're ready to take you away." Margaret spun around, her gun sweeping the empty air as she searched for threats that existed beyond physical sight. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the lights flickered with an electrical disturbance that had no earthly source. Alexander felt the presence too, not just Victoria, but a gathering of souls who had waited years for this moment of reckoning. "This is impossible," Margaret muttered, her southern composure completely shattered as she backed against the wall. "The dead can't hurt the living. I made sure of that. I had their bodies blessed, their graves consecrated. I followed all the rules." But her voice carried the terror of someone who was discovering that some rules couldn't be manipulated, some boundaries couldn't be crossed without consequences. Serafina stepped forward, her storm-colored eyes blazing with purpose. "The dead. It can't hurt the living, Margaret, but they can demand justice, and justice, when it finally comes, is swift and absolute." As she spoke, the gun in Margaret's hand began to tremble, not from her fear, but from some external force that seemed to be wresting control away from her. The playroom filled with an energy that was both terrible and beautiful, the combined will of all Margaret's victims, finally given voice, finally given power, finally ready to see their killer face the consequences of her crimes. And in that moment, Alexander understood that Serafina wasn't just a nanny, wasn't just a spiritual medium. She was an agent of cosmic justice, and Margaret's long reign of terror was about to end. What happened next defied every law of physics Alexander thought he understood. The gun in Margaret's hand began to glow with an ethereal light, growing too hot for her to hold. She cried out in pain as the weapon fell from her grasp, clattering harmlessly across the hardwood floor. But the real miracle wasn't the supernatural. Disarming, it was what materialized in the center of the room as the temperature continued to plummet. Victoria appeared first, translucent but unmistakably real, her auburn hair flowing as if moved by celestial winds. She was exactly as Alexander remembered her, beautiful, strong, radiant with the love that had defined their marriage. Behind her, other figures began to solidify. A young man in a navy uniform, an elderly woman clutching rosary beads, 3 children holding hands, all bearing the peaceful expressions of souls finally freed from earthly torment. "Hello, my darlings," Victoria said, her voice like music heard through water, addressing Emma and Ethan with infinite tenderness. The twins ran toward their mother's spirit without hesitation, passing through her ethereal form, but somehow still receiving the comfort they'd craved for 2 years. "Mommy," Emma cried, "we knew you'd come back. We kept your secrets safe just like you taught us." Margaret cowered against the playroom wall, her face a mask of terror as she stared at the ghosts of her victims. "This isn't real," she whimpered. "Dead people don't come back. I made sure they couldn't come back." But her protests died in her throat as Victoria turned to face her with eyes that blazed with righteous fury. "You were wrong about many things, Mother," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of the grave. You thought love could be murdered, that justice could be buried, that innocent children could be silenced forever. But love transcends. Death justice demands satisfaction, and the innocent never truly die. She gestured to the spirits behind her. We've all been waiting, Margaret. Waiting for someone with the gift to bridge our worlds, someone who could give voice to the voiceless. Serafina stepped forward, her earthly form somehow enhanced by the presence of the spirits, as if she were drawing strength from their collective will. Margaret Sinclair, you have been judged by those you wronged and found guilty of crimes against the natural order. Your victims offer you one chance for redemption. Confess your sins to the living world, reveal the location of every body you've hidden, and spend your remaining years making amends. But Margaret's response revealed the depth of her corruption. Even faced with undeniable supernatural judgment, she chose defiance over redemption. I won't apologize for protecting family wealth from weak hands, she screamed. I did what needed to be done. Every death served a greater purpose. Her words seemed to strike the assembled spirits like physical blows, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. The young man in the navy uniform, clearly one of Margaret's murdered husbands, spoke with a voice like winter wind. She refuses grace, even when freely offered. The judgment stands. The elderly woman with the rosary nodded gravely. Some souls choose damnation, even when salvation is within reach. The three children, their innocent faces glowing with otherworldly light, spoke in unison. Justice must be complete. Alexander watched in awe as Victoria approached Margaret, her spirit form radiating both love and implacable justice. You killed my unborn son, Mother. You stole my children's future, their inheritance, their peace. But your greatest crime was believing that love could be destroyed by death. She reached out with translucent hands that somehow grasped Margaret's shoulders. You're going to spend the rest of your life confessing every sin, returning every stolen dollar, and living with the knowledge that love has triumphed over your evil. What followed was both beautiful and terrible. Margaret's body went rigid as Victoria's spirit seemed to merge with her, and suddenly the killer's eyes filled with the memories and emotions of every victim she'd destroyed. She experienced their fear, their pain, their love for the families she'd torn apart. The empathy she'd spent a lifetime suppressing crashed over her like a tsunami, and she collapsed to her knees, sobbing with the accumulated grief of 11 murdered souls. I see them, Margaret whispered, her voice broken by genuine remorse. For the first time in decades. I see what I took from them. I see the children who grew up without parents, the spouses who died alone, the grandchildren who never knew their families. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of her crimes finally penetrated her hardened heart. God forgive me. I see them all. Serafina knelt beside the broken woman, her expression compassionate even in the face of such evil. Margaret, true justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. You can't undo what you've done, but you can spend whatever time remains to you making it right. She helped Margaret to her feet with surprising gentleness. The dead are willing to forgive if the living are willing to repent. As the spirits began to fade, Victoria turned to Alexander one final time. Take care of our babies, my love. They're going to sleep peacefully now. She blew a kiss to Emma and Ethan, who waved at their mother with the casual acceptance children. Have for miracles, and thank you for bringing Serafina to us. She's exactly what our family needed. The last thing Alexander saw before the spirits vanished completely was Victoria's radiant smile, the same expression of perfect love and contentment she'd worn on their wedding day, proof that death had not diminished her devotion but had instead purified it into something eternal and unbreakable. In the days that followed that supernatural reckoning, the Blackwood mansion transformed from a house of shadows into something resembling a home again. Margaret, broken but genuinely repentant, had turned herself into Charleston police with a full confession that shocked even seasoned detectives. She provided detailed information about all 11 murders, the locations of hidden assets, and the names of accomplices who had helped her cover her tracks over the decades. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a 20-year veteran who had seen every kind of human depravity, found herself struggling to process Margaret's confession. "In my entire career," she told Alexander during one of many interviews, "I've never encountered a case where the perpetrator provided such complete and voluntary disclosure. It's as if she's compelled to tell the truth, even when it damages her legal position." What Detective Mitchell couldn't know was that Margaret's compulsion came from a source beyond earthly law. The children's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Emma and Ethan, who hadn't slept through a single night in 2 years, now drifted peacefully into slumber each evening in Serafina's gentle care. Their nightmares had been replaced by dreams of their mother playing in meadows filled with light, sometimes accompanied by other children who had found peace beyond the veil. "Mommy says the dark lady isn't dark anymore," Emma explained to her father one morning over pancakes. "She says sadness made her do bad things, but now she remembers how to love." Serafina had taken on her role as nanny with a devotion that went far beyond professional duty. She taught the twins to read using Victoria's favorite poetry books, helped them plant a memorial garden where magnolias bloomed in memory of their mother, and most importantly, she listened when they spoke of their spiritual experiences with the patience of someone who understood that children exist closer to the divine than adults. But Alexander discovered that Serafina's gifts extended beyond childcare and supernatural mediation. She possessed an uncanny understanding of business that proved invaluable as he worked to untangle Margaret's financial crimes. "Your shipping company was targeted specifically," she explained one evening as they reviewed recovered documents. In his study, Margaret researched wealthy families with young children for years before she made contact. Victoria's family wasn't her first target, just the most successful. The scope of Margaret's criminal enterprise became clear as federal investigators traced her movements across 4 states and 23 years. She had systematically infiltrated wealthy families, always presenting herself as a grieving widow in need of emotional support. Her modus operandi was elegant in its simplicity: gain the trust of vulnerable families, insert herself into their financial affairs, and then eliminate obstacles to her inheritance through carefully orchestrated accidents. Alexander learned that Victoria had been closer to exposing the entire operation than anyone had realized. The private investigator she'd hired, Jacob Thornfield from Atlanta, had compiled evidence linking Margaret to the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands. "Mrs. Blackwood was incredibly brave," Thornfield told Alexander over the phone. "She knew she was in danger, but she was determined to protect your children's future. That recording device she left was her insurance policy." As autumn settled over Charleston, the legal proceedings began in earnest. Margaret pled guilty to 11 counts of first-degree murder, facing life in prison without parole. But her cooperation with authorities had led to the recovery of nearly $8 million in stolen assets, money that would be returned to the families she'd destroyed. The Children's Trust Fund, which had been depleted by $2 million, was fully restored with interest. Richard Hawthorne, Alexander's business partner, was amazed by the changes in the Blackwood family. "6 months ago, you were a broken man with traumatized children," he observed during a board meeting at Blackwood Maritime. "Now you're more focused and effective than I've ever seen you, and Emma and Ethan are thriving. That nanny of yours is a miracle worker." If only Richard knew how literal that assessment truly was. The other families Margaret had victimized reached out to Alexander as news of her arrest spread. The Pattersons from Savannah, who had lost their son Timothy 7 years earlier, wept with relief when they learned their suspicions had been validated. "We always knew it wasn't natural causes," Mrs. Patterson told Alexander during an emotional phone call. "But when you're grieving, it's so easy to doubt your instincts." Thank God someone finally listened to the children. Serafina had become more than a nanny. She was the guardian angel the Blackwood family had desperately needed. She helped Alexander navigate not just the practical challenges of single parenthood, but also the emotional healing required to move forward from such profound betrayal. "Trust isn't something you lose all at once," she told him one evening as they watched Emma and Ethan play in the garden. "It's rebuilt one moment at a time, one choice at a time." But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Alexander himself. The desperate, exhausted man who had sat in his office 6 months earlier, holding resignation letter number 27, had been replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from protecting loved ones from all harm, but from facing whatever darkness threatened them with courage and faith. And as he watched his children laugh and play under Serafina's watchful care, he knew that Victoria's greatest gift hadn't been the evidence that brought Margaret to justice. It had been sending them an angel disguised as a nanny. 1 year after Serafina's arrival, the Blackwood family celebrated Emma and Ethan's 6th birthday with a joy that had been absent from their home for too long. The mansion's gardens bloomed with late spring flowers, and children's laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only sorrow. But as Alexander watched Serafina help the twins blow out their birthday candles, he noticed something in her. Storm-colored eyes that filled him with unexpected dread, the look of someone preparing to say goodbye. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep in their own beds for the 365th consecutive night, Serafina found Alexander in his study, staring out at the Charleston harbor, where ships moved like distant dreams beneath the moonlight. "You know, don't you?" she said softly, settling into the chair across from his desk with the same grace she'd shown on their first meeting. "You've known for weeks that my time here is coming to an end." Alexander's hands trembled as he sat down, his bourbon, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like trapped tears. "The children will be devastated. You've become their anchor, their guide through the darkness. How can I explain to them that another person they love is leaving?" But even as he spoke, Alexander realized his grief went deeper than concern for Emma and Ethan. Somewhere along the way, he had fallen in love with this mysterious woman who had saved his family. Serafina's expression softened with infinite compassion. "Alexander, you must understand, I'm not like other people. I don't stay in one place, with one family living an ordinary life. I'm called to where the dead cannot find peace, where justice has been denied, where children suffer in silence." She gestured toward the window, where Spanish moss swayed in the evening breeze like ghostly fingers. "There are other families out there, other children who need what I can offer." The truth hit Alexander with devastating clarity. "You're leaving to hunt another killer, aren't you? Someone like Margaret, someone who uses family trust as a weapon." Serafina nodded, her auburn hair catching the lamplight as if touched by fire. "A man named Frederick Ashford in Natchez, Mississippi. He's been marrying widows with young children, then orchestrating their deaths to claim inheritance rights. 3 families destroyed in 5 years, and the children's spirits are crying out for justice." Alexander felt his carefully rebuilt world threatening to crumble again. "What about us? What about what we've built here? Emma and Ethan adore you, and I—" He stopped, unable to voice the depth of his feelings for fear that speaking them would make her departure more real. But Serafina heard what he couldn't say, and her own eyes filled with unshed tears. "I love you too, Alexander," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I love you and the children more than I've ever allowed myself to love anyone, but that's precisely why I have to go." She stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. "If I stay, if I try to live a normal life, I'll lose the gift that allows me to help families like yours. The dead speak to me because I exist between worlds, never fully belonging to either." The children appeared in the doorway then, as if summoned by their father's anguish. Emma clutched her mother's old teddy bear, while Ethan held Serafina's hand with desperate determination. "We heard you talking," Emma said, her green eyes wise beyond her years. "Serafina has to go help other children like us, doesn't she? Children whose mommies can't rest because bad people hurt them." Alexander was amazed by his daughter's understanding, but Ethan's next words nearly broke his heart. "Will you come back to us, Serafina? After you help the other children, will you remember where we live?" The longing in his son's voice reflected Alexander's own desperate hope that this wasn't truly goodbye forever. Serafina knelt down to embrace both children, her composure finally cracking as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "My darling ones, you will always be in my heart, no matter how far I travel or how long I'm away. And perhaps when you're older and no longer need a nanny, perhaps our paths will cross again." She looked up at Alexander over their heads, and he saw in her expression a promise that transcended words. But Emma, with the startling wisdom that had characterized her since Victoria's death, offered a perspective that stunned all three adults. "Daddy, Serafina isn't really leaving us. She's like Mommy now. She'll be with us even when we can't see her. The love doesn't go away just because the person does." From the mouths of babes came the truth that Alexander's grieving heart had been unable to grasp. As the family stood together in that lamplight study, surrounded by the weight of impending separation, something shifted in the air around them. Victoria's presence, always subtle since that night of supernatural justice, became almost tangible. Through some spiritual perception that defied explanation, Alexander felt his late wife's approval of his feelings for Serafina, her gratitude that their children had been loved so completely, and her blessing on whatever future awaited them all. "She's not angry," Emma whispered, looking at a space in the room where nothing visible stood. "Mommy says love makes more love. It doesn't take it away. She's happy that Daddy's heart is big enough for everyone who needs love." The profound simplicity of childhood wisdom illuminated what adult complexity had obscured. That loving Serafina didn't diminish Alexander's love for Victoria, but honored it. That night, as Serafina tucked Emma and Ethan into their beds one last time, she left each child with a gift that would sustain them through her absence. To Emma, she gave a silver locket containing a photo of Victoria, promising that whenever she wore it, her mother's love would surround her like invisible arms. To Ethan, she offered a leather-bound journal, encouraging him to write down his dreams so he could remember the messages his mother sent while he slept. Serafina's departure came with the morning mist that often shrouded Charleston Harbor, as if nature itself was weeping for the separation. But what Alexander witnessed that dawn would remain etched in his memory forever, not just as goodbye, but as proof that some bonds transcend the physical realm. As Serafina's black sedan disappeared down the oak-lined driveway, Victoria's spirit appeared one final time, walking beside the departing car like a guardian blessing their guardian angel's journey. 3 months later, a letter arrived from Natchez that confirmed Serafina's success and broke Alexander's heart simultaneously. Frederick Ashford had been arrested after confessing to multiple murders, driven to repentance by supernatural encounters that local police couldn't explain. "The children are sleeping peacefully now," Serafina wrote in her elegant script, "but I carry the memory of Emma and Ethan's laughter with me always. They saved me as much as I saved them. Alexander threw himself into rebuilding his life with the determination of a man who understood that love honors love by continuing to live fully. Blackwood Maritime expanded internationally under his renewed leadership, creating the Victoria Blackwood Foundation for Children's Advocacy in memory of his late wife. Emma and Ethan, now 8 years old, had grown into remarkable children who spoke of their mother and Serafina with equal reverence, understanding that both women had shaped their lives in profound ways. The twins had developed abilities that both amazed and concerned Alexander. Emma could sense when people were hiding pain behind smiles, often approaching strangers in public to offer comfort they desperately needed. Ethan recorded dreams that later proved prophetic, including a detailed vision of a school fire that led to the discovery of faulty wiring before anyone was hurt. Their gifts, inherited through exposure to Serafina's otherworldly presence, made them beacons of hope in a world that often forgot children could be vessels of divine wisdom. 2 years after Serafina's departure, Alexander received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Sinclair, now serving life without parole, had requested a meeting that prison officials reluctantly arranged. The woman who sat across from him bore little resemblance to the manipulative killer who had terrorized his family. Prison had aged her dramatically, but more striking was the genuine peace in her eyes, the expression of someone who had found redemption in the darkest place imaginable. "I wanted to tell you about the children," Margaret said, her voice carrying none of its former manipulation. The ones I hurt." She looked down at her hands, weathered by institutional life, but no longer trembling with the anxiety of hidden guilt. "They visit me sometimes, not to torment me, but to show me they've found peace." Emma and Ethan were right. Love makes more love. Even my victims chose forgiveness over vengeance. Alexander found himself moved by Margaret's transformation, recognizing Serafina's influence in the killer's spiritual awakening. "She helped you too, didn't she? Even after everything you did, Serafina found a way to bring you peace." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her lined cheeks. "She visits the prison sometimes, not just me, but other women who've lost their way. She says her gift works both ways. She can help the living find peace just as she helps the dead find justice." The revelation that Serafina was continuing to touch lives even behind prison walls filled Alexander with pride and longing in equal measure. She wasn't just hunting killers. She was healing the broken, offering redemption to the irredeemable, proving that no soul was beyond salvation if it truly sought forgiveness. Her mission was even more beautiful and complex than he had understood. On the 3rd anniversary of Victoria's death, Alexander took Emma and Ethan to Magnolia Cemetery for their annual remembrance visit. But this year brought an unexpected gift. Serafina stood beside Victoria's headstone, looking exactly as she had the day she'd arrived at the mansion, untouched by the passage of time. "I promised I would find you again," she said simply, opening her arms as the twins ran to embrace her. "Are you staying this time?" Ethan asked, his journal clutched against his chest as if it contained all the dreams he'd been saving to share with her. Serafina's smile held mysteries and promises as she knelt to meet his eyes. "I'm staying as long as you need me, my darling boy, but I suspect you and Emma are growing into your own gifts now. Soon, you won't need a nanny. You'll be the ones, helping other children find their way." Alexander approached slowly, afraid that moving too quickly might shatter this miraculous reunion like a beautiful dream. But when Serafina stood and took his hand, her touch was warm and real and permanent. "There are no more hunting trips for a while," she said softly, answering his unspoken question. "The universe has decided that this family has given enough, sacrificed enough. It's time for us to simply live and love and be together." As they walked among the weathered headstones toward the cemetery gates, Emma skipped ahead while Ethan shared 3 years' worth of dreams and visions with Serafina. Alexander felt Victoria's presence surrounding them like a benediction, her love blessing the family they were becoming, not a replacement for what was lost, but a continuation of what was eternal. That evening, as Alexander tucked his children into their beds with Serafina beside him, he realized that their story had never been about sleeping through the night. It had been about awakening to the truth that love persists beyond death, that justice ultimately prevails, and that some angels wear human faces and stay just as long as broken hearts need time to heal. 5 years later, the Blackwood Mansion had become something unprecedented in Charleston society, a home where the supernatural was as natural as morning coffee and bedtime stories. Emma and Ethan, now 13, had grown into remarkable teenagers who used their inherited gifts to help other children cope with trauma and loss. Their mother's foundation had expanded internationally, with Serafina serving as its spiritual counselor, helping families around the world find peace after tragedy. Alexander and Serafina had married in a ceremony that defied conventional explanation. Victoria's spirit had appeared during the exchange of vows, placing translucent hands over theirs as if joining them in a blessing that transcended earthly bounds. The wedding guests, a mixture of Charleston society, former clients, and people whose lives had been touched by Serafina's gift, witnessed something they would never forget: proof that love truly knows no boundaries between worlds. But the most extraordinary development came on a warm October evening, exactly 7 years after Victoria's death. Serafina, now visibly pregnant with their first child together, felt the baby's movements grow urgent as she sat in the garden where magnolias bloomed eternal. Emma and Ethan rushed to her side, their faces glowing with otherworldly knowledge that had become their trademark. "The baby knows," Emma whispered, her hand resting on Serafina's rounded belly. "She knows that Mommy Victoria is here to welcome her." Ethan nodded solemnly, his journal open to a page covered with drawings of angels and children playing together in fields of light. "Her name is Victoria Grace," he announced, with the certainty of someone who had dreamed true dreams. "And she's going to help us help other families, just like Serafina taught us." Alexander felt his world shift as he realized the profound circle their lives had traced. Victoria's death had brought them Serafina. Serafina's love had brought them healing, and now their healing was bringing them new life that carried Victoria's name and spirit forward into the next generation. The baby, growing within Serafina, would be raised knowing that she had two mothers, one who watched from heaven and one who guided from earth. As if responding to the mention of her name, Victoria's spirit materialized in the garden with unprecedented clarity, more solid and radiant than she had appeared since that first supernatural confrontation with Margaret. She approached Serafina with infinite tenderness, placing ghostly hands on the unborn child, who kicked in recognition of her celestial touch. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, her voice carrying across dimensions with crystalline clarity. "Thank you for loving my children, for healing my husband, for bringing justice to my death, and for carrying my memory forward in this new life." She turned to Alexander, her green eyes shining with joy instead of the sorrow that had marked her previous appearances. "I can rest completely now, my love. Our family is whole, our children are protected, and love has triumphed over every darkness." Margaret Sinclair, now 73 and nearing the end of her prison sentence, had become an unlikely advocate for restorative justice within the correctional system. Her transformation, guided by Serafina's periodic visits, had inspired dozens of other inmates to seek redemption instead of revenge. She had helped authorities solve 17 cold cases by providing information about other killers she had encountered during her criminal career, turning her knowledge of evil toward the service of good. Detective Sarah Mitchell, now retired but still haunted by cases that defied explanation, often visited the Blackwood family to discuss the paranormal, elements of criminal investigation. "What you've accomplished here," she told Alexander during one such visit, "goes beyond solving crimes or catching killers. You've proven that healing is possible, that justice and mercy can coexist, and that love really is stronger than death." Emma had begun writing a book about her experiences with the spirit world, hoping to help other children understand that seeing beyond the veil wasn't frightening but beautiful. Ethan had started a dream journal program at their school, teaching classmates to recognize prophetic visions and use their gifts responsibly. Both children carried their mother's compassion and Serafina's wisdom, becoming beacons of hope for young people struggling with loss and trauma. The shipping business that had once consumed Alexander's life had evolved into something much greater. Under his renewed purpose, Blackwood Maritime now transported not just cargo, but hope, partnering with international humanitarian organizations to deliver aid to children in crisis zones. Every ship in their fleet carried Victoria's name and a blessing from Serafina, protecting crews and cargo through some of the world's most dangerous waters. As autumn painted Charleston in shades of gold and crimson, the family gathered for their evening ritual, dinner together, followed by bedtime stories that often featured real accounts of their supernatural adventures. Tonight, as Serafina read to Emma and Ethan about the night they first met their mother's spirit, Alexander felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. "I'm John Parker, and remember, every story hides a truth," he thought, echoing words he'd heard somewhere in a dream, understanding now that their truth was simple and profound. Love never dies, justice never sleeps, and sometimes the most broken families become the most beautiful when they allow divine grace to guide their healing. From her place in the garden, where magnolias bloomed eternal, Victoria's spirit smiled as she watched her earthly family prepare for sleep. Emma and Ethan drifted off peacefully, their dreams filled with visions of the sister who would soon join them. Alexander held Serafina close, feeling their unborn daughter move between them like a bridge between worlds. And somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour with a sound like angels singing, blessing a family that had learned the most important lesson of all, that love transcends every boundary, conquers every darkness, and transforms every tragedy into triumph for those brave enough to believe. The Millionaire's twins had finally learned to sleep through the night, but their story had become something far greater than rest. It had become proof that when earthly love joins hands with heavenly grace, miracles don't just happen once, they continue forever.